All right, let's see. All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Brian Anselin, and I am the program manager at LineRun and your host today. LineRun is an experiential career and industry education platform for tomorrow's workforce. We empower our community of leaders to connect, innovate, and grow through media, events, and programs such as today's session. We're very happy to have Keith Corso here today. He is the founder and CEO of BusRight, and he's joining us for our discussion on building community in a socially distant world. So Keith, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Brian. You're one of the first few people I spoke to in the ground transportation industry, and so it's a nice full circle here.
Definitely, and you and I share that affinity for public transportation and ground transportation in general. So the fact that it's kind of fortuitous that everything went around full circle and we're having this discussion today is really amazing. And before we get to our questions, a little bit about BusRight. BusRight is a single, comprehensive, integrated solution to improve student transportation and customer experience by optimizing core processes for route planning, tracking, and real-time reporting of school bus locations, student ridership, and multi-channel communications between all committed stakeholders. How did I do?
You did okay. I think the question is, how did we do? And with a rapidly changing company, mission statements do grow and they do evolve. And so we've made a little bit of a, adjustment since that initial description, but so far so good.
You know what? Like everything else that's going on in the world, it's constantly evolving. So all we have to do is adapt.
There you go.
All right. You are working in a very needed and in-demand space with school bus tech and working in ground transportation for students. What originally led you to become an entrepreneur, and specifically in this niche?
Yeah, good question, Brian. I think it was, being a student rider not too long ago in K-12, taking the bus to and from school, to sporting events, extracurricular programs, you realize just how inefficient school buses are. Like Uber, Uber is based off of demand. They change their routes in real time, but school buses, they set their routes every single year at best, and oftentimes transportation leaders don't change their routes for decades. And so even though fluctuation of ridership is quite frequent on a day-to-day basis, season to season, bus routes do not change. And so that basically was a realization I had when I was driving behind a school bus one day when I was a senior in high school, and I realized this bus had made these 4 consecutive stops and not one student had gotten off the bus at each stop. And that kind of solidified just how inefficient school buses were from a routing standpoint. And that kind of led to a few other thoughts that I had around the issues I ran into as a child taking the bus, whether it was waiting outside in the frigid winter mornings, wondering where my school bus was, to getting left on the school bus and having to reroute over an hour to get back to my house. All inefficient. There could have been a bit, more safe way of doing that. And I think it was, talking to different student transportation leaders, state directors, dispatchers, drivers, parents, anyone that interfaced with the yellow school bus to better understand what their perspectives look like, so I can marry my interest in technology and apply it into this evolving industry.
I love the fact that how you were able to connect all these dots. So one of the things, and I told you this before, that is a challenge for legacy industries such as transportation, is being able to recognize what the problems are and being proactive on how do you apply solutions that make sense not just for customers but on the back end. So I think the fact that you're able to connect those dots really quickly and start those conversations is really a credit to you and your team, and the fact that you were able to be so engaged in this process to want to learn from all of these stakeholders what the actual problem was and how you can fix it.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brian. And part of that skill set was obtained during our first conversation years ago, where I was just trying to pick your brain, and I realized that in doing so, I was learning a ton, and so I can apply that process to other industry leaders over the past few years. and continue to learn from other folks that have been in the industry for decades.
Definitely. Everything's a learning experience, and it's all about the way you apply it. So I couldn't agree more. And you are an entrepreneur, and a young entrepreneur to that effect. You're still in college. You're at Northeastern, and yeah, you're studying entrepreneurship now. But what did you know about entrepreneurship, starting a business, startups, going into launching BusRight, and how has that original view evolved since you launched your company?
Yeah, so I'm studying finance in school, but in terms of my knowledge of entrepreneurship, beyond just identifying a problem that needs to be solved, and then basically figuring out every single stakeholder, piece of development that needed to be married in order to put a product in market, and also deliver a great customer experience. I think at the end of the day, once you realize that delivering the best customer experience and actually solving their problem, once you realize that that's the most important thing, you kind of reverse engineer everything. And so delivering that experience, a lot of what contributes to that is being so relationship driven. This industry is one giant family. If you go to any of the trade shows, you'll understand that people have been there for many decades, and it really is like one family. And so being an outsider, being young in the industry is definitely you become a bit of an outcast. But as soon as you start to absorb the information and build those relationships and find champions like yourself to network around the trade floor, to introduce you to other student transportation leaders, I think that the job becomes easier. But what I will say is that it's all about identifying a problem and then figuring out that this industry is based off relationships. Whether you're building a company, you need to have the skill set to build relationships with customers, investors, advisors, team members, and pretty much anyone else that is a stakeholder.
Definitely. And I think that's one thing that we can take out of entrepreneurship in general, and apply it to other parts of our lives, even if we're not entrepreneurs, that relationships are so important, and being able to understand how people think, relating to them, and then also having the ability to listen before putting out our own agendas. I think it's so powerful, and it's definitely needed. And it's something that I believe that entrepreneurial thinking and the way that we approach business, careers, life in general, it's just so impactful and so important.
No, I totally agree.
You, as an active student who has so many different things going on aside from being a student, you have this company, you're actively involved in the startup scene in Boston, different organizations. Can you describe for us what a quote unquote regular day in your life is, and how you're able to organize your responsibilities and keep yourself accountable?
Yeah, well, you asked at an interesting time. During quarantine, the day in the life is definitely very different than pre-COVID. But I'll give you the answer in terms of what's going on today. And so today, I'm fortunate enough to be a part of a program at Northeastern University called the Sherman Center Co-op. The Sherman Center is the Center for Engineering Entrepreneurship on campus, and they fund a few students to work on their companies full time for their co-ops, which is basically 6 months. And so I'm in that process right now. So fortunately, I'm not too worried about classes because I'm not taking any right now, though I will be soon. So that's number one. Number two, a day in the life like right now, working with the rest of the BusRight team to figure out how do we navigate this period where buses are not on the road. Where else can we apply our technology that has an impact and we can also receive value? These are all conversations that are top of mind. So, team calls, one-on-ones, it's all about making sure we're all sharing the right information at the right time so we can all really drive the company forward. And in terms of like tactically day to day, I try to go for a run or a walk at the very least, if not play a game of wiffle ball. Second to that, I'm very active with scheduling demos. And so we're doing about 5 to 10 demos every day with transportation directors, supervisors, and dispatchers and routers. And so that definitely takes up a big portion, of my time. And in order to schedule those demos, of course, there needs to be, a lot of outreach that comes with it. So it's about finding people, where they are, whether it's meeting them on Facebook, whether it's reaching out to them on LinkedIn, whether it is using previous contacts to get introductions to other folks. So a lot of that is just kind of connecting the dots. And right now we are hiring for a few roles. And so a lot of my time is being spent there. not only figuring out what roles and responsibilities we need to fill the gaps we have at BusRight, but also, where communicating these opportunities correctly to the outside world is definitely a bit of a challenge. You sometimes you get pigeonholed in the work that you're doing, but being able to take a step back and tell someone, here's what we're up to, here's the opportunity, and truly, make it a mutually beneficial experience during that interview process, something that I've been, quite interested in learning more about. So.
Definitely. And I think your approach to, mutually beneficial relationships and outcomes is really underlined on both your mindset and why you've seen the success you've seen to this point, because you really focus on people and what is it that they need, and not just pushing down the product. And I think that's a testament to you and your team and your mindset of trying to help people first versus, uh, I'm trying to sell this product and I have to meet a quota. And I think
Right.
that's a mindset that unfortunately is so deeply woven into business and sales today that we often forget that you're actually selling to a human being. So really kudos to you guys for really pushing through with, you know, understanding what people need first, and then building a process around that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you nailed it on the head when you said, it's really a people's game. Building relationships with people, understanding their problems before ever showing your product, and leading with that conversation first, I think is absolutely critical.
Definitely. In line with how you're approaching building relationships and being around the industry and understanding and learning every day, can you share with us what your ultimate goal for BusRight is? What is it that you want to see? What type of change do you want to happen? And how you and your team are planning to get there?
Yeah, loaded question. The goal is really to provide safe and efficient student transportation technology to the 500,000 school buses that are carrying our nation's most precious cargo, which are our children. And so what exactly does that mean when you think about safety and efficiency? Safety could include things like virtual panic buttons, emergency rerouting, arming drivers with the right tools, God forbid anything happens. And, that could also include, when you think about efficiency, making sure that you're building routes, taking into account who's actually on the bus that day. And when you marry those two, something powerful can happen. But also when you give those tools to people, to transportation leaders, the folks that are building those routes, the folks that are fielding calls from parents, that is where the magic really happens. And so that's ultimately the goal. And, in terms of how we get there, at the end of the day, it's really one step at a time and one customer at a time, one happy customer, if I can, put an exclamation point on that. What we've done is with our customers and potential customers, we built a BusRight design partner program. And so every other week, a group of about 5 to 10 of, the industry's most tech forward individuals will get together with folks in the BusRight team. And we talk about, number one, industry trends, and number two, feedback that these folks have directly on the BusRight product that we can then bake back into the product. And so we try to keep that, again, like you said, mutually beneficial, where they can network with like-minded individuals while also, seeing the fruits of their feedback translate directly into our product roadmap and ultimately into the product they will end up using. So that's kind of, ultimately how I think we build a big business from this, is really keeping that customer feedback in mind every step of the way.
You know, and I admire you for taking that initiative and really doubling back and going through that feedback loop to understand what people want. It is definitely crucial, and not just for an entrepreneur, but also for someone who is about to start their career, or who's about to pivot in their career, and understanding what the market is saying and what the market needs, and adapting to the market versus trying to sell just what we were saying earlier, just trying to just sell your skills into a position that might not even be a good fit because of what's needed in the environment. It's having the ability to step back and understand a situation is one of those crucial things that it takes time to develop, but once you do, it really opens your eyes.
Yeah, no, once again, you hit it on the nail. So I think we're talking the same language.
Definitely. doubling down on this, one of the things I truly admire about you is how you're able to get people together, even if they're competitors, and using social media to do this outside of their normal circle to talk and discuss and to share knowledge. So if you can just go a little bit deeper on how you were able to really spark these discussions and then build a community around them where it's not just them talking about your product, but it's also them talking about their problems.
Yeah, so it's a great question, Brian. And I'll say three things. Number one, I think it's recognizing that you all share a common goal. So whether it's a competing product, whether it is a fellow bus company, school district, we all have the same goal of providing safe and efficient student transportation. And so laying that as the groundwork, I think, is step number one. Number two is, meeting people where they are. So, whether it's going to bus lots in the morning and talking to bus drivers and bringing them donuts, which we did for almost 2 weeks straight leading up to the virus over in a district in Massachusetts, or whether it is realizing that folks in the student transportation industry, for whatever reason, live on Facebook. And so we created a school bus technology leaders Facebook group to bring those people together where they can ask those questions, where they can, find like-minded individuals. And so, that's another thing. We didn't, go to Facebook first because it worked for us. We went to Facebook first because it worked for them. And also, that might be for like the user group, but also you have to recognize that for investors and advisors, a lot of our investors and advisors, they, like to chat in coffee shops, and they like, quick conversations and information that's really easily digestible. And so changing your messaging, but with the same, core message at the end of the day, I think is hugely valuable depending on who you're talking to, because different people like to receive information in a different way, in a different channel. And the last thing is, adding value first. And I saved the best for last here because I think that you can't, as an entrepreneur, you're always the first one to be knocked off of everyone's calendar. And you're always the first one to be, cut from whatever conversation, because at the end of the day, you are trying to absorb so much from industry leaders, and you're trying to capture so much time from people that are, that have tight schedules to begin with. And so the reason why I bring that up is because adding value first shows that this is not just a relationship that I just want to, get a paycheck from you and I want to deliver a product and I'll never see you again. It's really, we're in this one together, whether we work together or not in some more formal capacity. Being able to show that I know how to help you before even, making a sale, I think is definitely helps that part of the conversation. And so when you think about building a community, it's one where people can, freely share their ideas, thoughts, concerns, etc. And that's what you do when you show that you can actually hear them out, whether that's just reacting to what they're saying or actually hearing them and then baking that feedback back into the product.
Exactly. And I definitely believe that you have the right strategy there, and listening before acting it is one of those crucial things that you just can't get wrong. Otherwise, you kind of veer off into a track that you don't want to be on. And, taking that and pivoting it a little bit aside outside of your business, how have you been able to use these strategies and these best practices that you've been able to garner for building this community within an industry and around your product? How are you able to use those strategies towards things that you're involved in college at Northeastern or in other ventures? How has this translated for you, if at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. When running a company, our team right now is in 7 different states. The age ranges from 20 years old to close to 50, all different backgrounds, different levels of experience. Most of the team are engineers. There's a few non-engineering folks. And so there's a lot of just, clashing experiences and people that are coming from various different perspectives. And so what that has really taught me is, how do you run an organization that is built by people? Because that's what organizations are at the end of the day. And so, whether it is scheduling a one-on-one with someone, or whether it is, handling a situation where one of your customers, is having a poor experience with a problem, like how do you create the right processes, but using that people first, mindset, I think is hugely valuable. And at the end of the day, whether you're doing that with a company or whether you're doing that with a student organization like the Entrepreneurs Club, you always have different stakeholders, and stakeholders don't have to have a vested, financial interest in an entity. They could just be stakeholders because they show up to one of your events on a Monday night, or because because they actually like invest in your company. Stakeholders could be customers as well. And so if you have the right messaging with your stakeholders, it doesn't matter who they are. They could be users, they could be customers, they could be investors, advisors. You're not changing your messaging, and you're being upfront no matter where, what you're doing, and you're applying that to the different organizations that you're involved with.
Authenticity, it's one of those words that gets tossed around a lot, and a lot of people try to use it and frame it in a way that makes sense for them, but it really underlines an approach to understanding people, listening to them, and then having a mindset. So it's one of those things that it's one of those essentials. And I think what you're saying and being able to apply that across the board, it's kind of irrespective of the purpose, but the fact that you're able to really use your voice, your message, and who you are to communicate, but adapt it to the person. It's one of those key factors to success that always gets overlooked.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I recently finished a book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, founder of Andreessen Horowitz. And, the reason why I love that book so much is because everyone talks about how do you build a great community? How do you build a great company? You hire the best people and you lead company, team calls like this, but no one ever talks about what happens when you have to do layoffs, what happens when your largest customer, churns, and really difficult things that happen within the growth of a company. And so I cannot recommend that book enough, because when you think about building community and stakeholder alignment, things do end up happening, and you have to be equally prepared for those events than you do when you do have the opportunity where people are having a great experience with your product and team members are getting along, etc.
I'll add that book to my list.
You got it.
You know, work from home and social distancing have been two of the biggest buzz-worthy terms that have come out of this moment in time. And with that in mind, what motivates you to keep you and your team going, especially the fact that there's no real bus movements going on, and you're not really able to see the fruits of your labor in person. Like how are you able to keep on going and to motivate yourself and move forward during this uncertainty?
Yeah, it's a great question, Brian. And it was tough. We signed a partnership with the ninth largest bus company in the U.S. A couple months before the pandemic, and we were just getting some, our technology rolled out on their buses, and all of a sudden buses were no longer on the road. And so that was definitely a challenge that we had to kind of figure out a workaround to. And so what we realized was that school buses were being repurposed to service the 51% of students on free and reduced meal plans by delivering meals to them during this time. And so how can we aid transportation directors to spin up new routes, to give drivers the right training and directions, and to give people at those homes real-time tracking information to see exactly where their meals are in real time, whether it's meals, yearbook deliveries, homeworks, cap and gowns, we've delivered it all. And so it's finding out where our school bus is being used right now and how can we aid that particular use case. But also something else unrelated to kind of student transportation, we realized that our technology is applicable to small businesses that are standing up their own delivery efforts. And so through talking to one of my cousins who started a oyster business out in Long Island, he was telling me about the challenges of figuring out how to build routes for all these customers that now want oysters delivered directly to their home. How to give his drivers the correct navigation based off of hundreds of different stops. And largely those are similar challenges that we were solving with our technology at BusRight. And so we ended up launching that about a month and a half ago, and to date we just crossed over $250,000 worth of goods delivered on the platform, donuts, coffee, oysters, etc. We've delivered to over 4,000 different homes, hospitals, community centers, and over 1,500 people have downloaded the BusRight app to track the real-time location of their delivery in real time. And so the reason I bring that up is because what keeps us motivated is the fact that we're able to not only impact communities during this time, and specifically like small businesses that are hurting, but we're also able to test our technology in this environment, whether it's the new parent tracking apps that customers are now using, whether it's our new routing tools. We're able to get real-time feedback, and that's, I think, really exciting about this process.
Definitely. I think having that mindset of being able to adapt and understand, scan. I'll use one of our analogies in our industry, right? Scan your mirrors.
Yep.
Make sure that you see what's going on and read the little fine print saying the objects in the rear mirror are actually closer than they appear, and being able to see what's going on in the mirror before you actually make a move left or right. I think, and we've been talking about this entire discussion, and being able to recognize what's going on, having the ability to talk to people and not just make a decision based on what you see, but talk to people and making sure that you verify what the information is and what the environment is, and adapting and adjusting from there. Really having that framework in that order helps to really offset any issues that may come from disruptions or any shifts in environment, or if we're talking about students or people launching their career, potential issues like what we're dealing with right now, where they might lose an internship or a full-time opportunity because the environment changed and companies are not hiring. Being able to regroup and having a process to build around that is so not just important, but crucial for long-term success. So we always try to measure things in ROI, but sometimes it's just, you just can't, because it's a long-term orientation.
Absolutely. And I love your analogy with the rear view mirror situation. It is definitely true. I mean, there's some aspect of looking at what has happened, not only seconds and hours ago, but also, decades ago, and why things are the way they are. And if there's a reason to change things, I tie that back into how we think about routing, where it's on a more dynamic basis, whereas the industry has kind of taken total enrollment and built routes based off of that. And so while it's really important to look at what's happened in the past, it's also figuring out, what in the past can be improved upon.
Definitely. And just bringing this back full circle on a high level, we have an audience of students, we have an audience of professionals, entrepreneurs, organizations that are here with us right now, and will also be watching this as a podcast later on. So for everyone who's tuning in, based on your experience to this point, if you had to give us a top 5 list on how to build, motivate, and activate your community right now in this environment where social distancing and work from home is the norm, what would that be?
Yeah, top 5. I have to say the first thing is test things fast. Test new plans, test new products, like get something out in the market. It's more likely than not that whatever that is not going to work. Like, we tried building community on different platforms before our Facebook group, some more successful than others. And, if you try to plan, like ultimately you test something and then you use the feedback that you get with that particular product or experience or community, and then you iterate on that. It's really rare, at least in my opinion, to hit that on the nail kind of day one. And so, test things fast and limit your planning, which is a little bit contrarian, I think has been really helpful to the BusRight team. I also think because a lot of the folks have been, we're remote friendly. Like I said, we're working from 7 different states right now. We have people in a couple different countries. We've just, the time that we all have together is really limited. And so because of that, we're really execution focused. And that has worked out well for us in the short amount of time that we've been around for the past few years. The second thing is, meeting people where they are. As I mentioned earlier in our discussion, finding them at the bus lots, finding them on Facebook groups, finding your, next potential hire at a coffee shop in Boston. I know it sounds, pretty cliche, but sometimes these things do happen. And so meet people where they like to hibernate originally. And so I definitely say that's important. The next thing is adding value first. I know I mentioned that as well. But in order to create an actually mutually beneficial relationship, it's not just about delivering a product that has a great experience. It's about the customer journey starts way before that. It's about how they find out about your product, how they find out about your company. And so right now what we're doing at BusRight is putting together a resources guide for student transportation leaders to help them get buses back on the road for the upcoming school year, helping with scenario planning and its implications on student transportation, helping with various sanitation efforts, and things like that. And so, before ever working with, most of the folks in our community, we're sending out this type of helpful feedback that we're also capturing and kind of reproducing in that fashion. And so I think that's important. The next thing, which kind of goes to helping people first, is don't expect everything in return, and because the return to you might not be what folks think the return is to them. And so it's really just about having the right type of motivation, and you really have to be excited about the work that you're doing in order to not expect something in return, and not feel bad when you don't receive value on the other end, which translates into the last point here, which is you have to love what you do on a day-to-day basis. Like, people might say, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to start a company. But how I internalize that is you have to love, being on Zoom calls all day. You have to love talking to customers. You have to love hearing that your product is terrible. You have to love hearing that your product is great. You have to love, going out and raising money and hearing no 100 times. And I think that the actual day-to-day function of what you do, you have to love. It's not just the mission, because the mission isn't what wakes me up in the morning always.
Your last point of, you have to love what you do. It's not saying that you have to be good at what you do, because sometimes skill gets in the way of progress and common sense. So it really comes down to that core love. And I think that's a universal thing, no matter if you're an entrepreneur or if you're going you have a goal in mind for your career, and you go into corporations. You have to have a sense that you belong there because you want to be there, and you believe in what you are doing and have that core passion for it. And I think that's the one invariable that you can't understate and you can't really measure. And it's one of those things where you don't immediately see it, so you might not recognize it, but it's there, and that's the thing that's going to propel you, and that's the thing that's going to keep you going through difficult times such as this.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree.
I'm going to end with this question before we open it up to our audience right now. I love ending conversations with this question because it's kind of in retrospect, and it usually gets a good laugh. So let's see if I can get one out of you. If you were to tell yourself, or your younger self, before you even started college and before you started your business, if you were to give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
One piece of advice. Ooh, that's a good one. One piece of advice. I think, especially when you're in college, like, don't say no to new opportunities. I think people are very specific about, like, plan your path so that you have, like, this much social life, this much, extracurriculars and things like that. Just don't say no for your college experience, because there's so many different opportunities and avenues. You might figure out, oh, wow, that, mock trial organization actually, prompted me to become a lawyer, or, getting involved in going to that one event on Monday night for the Entrepreneurs Club, like, really got me excited about building a company and solving this problem that I experienced yesterday. And so it's not coming into that experience with a preset path that we're so trained to do by, going through high school and figuring out the exact career that you want to do and the major you want to take, like, totally just unbundling that thought process and going to college with an open mind, and really testing out everything, whether it's, testing out the different friend groups you're going to hang out with, where on campus, where in the city you're going to spend your time, and the different projects that you're going to embark on. I think that is, just have an open mind. But ultimately, when you realize that you're receiving a lot of value from something and you're delivering a lot of value, like, double down on that. And so it's really about understanding when that inflection point is, because your ability to focus in at that time is what I think what's going to make or break you. And I think I wish I had known that earlier.
Inflection plus value equals investment. You know what? I got to copy that. That's awesome.
I agree.
All right. So that's all the questions I have, but let's see if anyone in our audience today has any questions for you. So let's see. Do we have anybody? Anyone ask Keith or I anything at all? Did we do that good of a job?
Mm.
I guess so. Sometimes, sometimes having a discussion and underlying points and really drilling down a core message works.
There you go. I hope so, and I hope folks learn from this. And Brian, it is always a pleasure to chat with you and hear about what's going on in your world as well.
Definitely. Keith, thank you so much again for joining us, for doing this. So you are our very first guest on Founders Take, and couldn't thank you enough for joining us today. And uh, I'm looking forward to seeing what you're going to be doing 1 week from now, because you're one of the most driven, honest, transparent, and also intellectually smart and passionate people I've ever met. And not just because we share a core passion in transportation, but because you've been able to really change people's lives because of it. So kudos to you. And thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Well, it's like conversations that we had years ago that prompt people to go down these journeys, and so I hope I can be part of that for someone else. And I'm really excited about the work that you're doing in the space.
Definitely, thank you. And with that, also want to mention that our Founders Take events take place every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern US. So feel free to join us. Our next session is on Tuesday, June 9th, which is next Tuesday, with Jedi Weller from Open Forge. So really amazing entrepreneur out in Philadelphia who has a worldwide team and network of folks doing really incredible things. And we are talking with him about managing a remote team. So definitely something relevant for where we are today. And go check that out. It's on our website, so linerun.co/events. And also check out some of our classes. We're starting a series on personal branding. That's starting in the middle of June. So feel free to check that out. And if anything else, we'll see you around. And thank you so much for watching. And Keith, thank you again for being here and sharing all of your insights.
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate the time.
All right.